So, welcome everybody to today's session on basic gardening. Our first session today, we're going to go over some of the very basics to get things started on the right foot. So, to me, gardening is a powerful tool to bring food to your plate. If you have enough yard that you need a lawnmower, you have enough room in your yard to grow enough food to make a dent in your food budget, in your grocery budget. So it's a winter webinar 2025. Why do I do this in the winter time? Well, in summertime, we gardeners are always way too busy to attend these kinds of things. But this time of year, it's gray, it's cold, we're not gardening. But in February is the season to get things started. So gardening can be a very frugal way to supplement your diet, or it can be a very expensive hobby. So everybody heard about, oh yeah, here's my $80 tomato, right? Because you go to the hardware store and you buy all kinds of equipment and tools and all kinds of different things. And I mean, it's very tempting as well to spend a lot of money. Everybody's got something to sell you to solve your problems. But I'm not going to steer you towards going to the store to spend your money. I'm going to steer you towards ways to make that budget a little bit tighter, stretch your dollar a lot more. So, like I said, if you have enough lawn that you need a lawnmower, you have enough space to grow a significant amount of food, particularly with some of the techniques that we'll be going over on this webinar series. Spending wisely, recycle, upcycle, cut corners, experiment, creative thriftiness is part of the fun of gardening. So, some of the things that we can look at for thriftiness, you can go to the store and you can buy bunch of fancy pots and all kinds of stuff like that. But you could always just simply take a little basic drinking cups that are really really cheap, punch a couple of holes in the bottom, and that's a perfectly fine pot to get a plant started. Or ice cream or yogurt containers or water bottles or pop bottles. You can always recycle all kinds of things. Like for me, I use an old honey jug with holes pierced into the cap in order to water my plants this way, right? I could have bought a fancy watering tin, but I had an old jug, so save money. Um, so you only need a few hand tools to grow food: a hoe, a rake, a shovel, a hose and a nozzle, and a wheelbarrow. So those are the only tools you really need in order to prepare your garden and get things started. I propose things that are more like no-till gardening. It's a lot less labor intensive, so you don't really need a tiller. You can always put down a tarp on your property and let the tarp kill the grass. You can set that down in the fall months, lift your tarp in the spring, spread some compost, and plant. You can do it basic like that. You can till it, but tillage over the long term, if it's repeated, has a tendency to deteriorate soil quality and soil tilth, and all of the structure in soil is actually degraded with frequent um, tilling. Um, I would recommend on their first year, till your garden, incorporate a lot of organic matter into your garden soil, because that's the one ingredient that's missing in most of our soils, is we just don't have enough organic matter in there. And what happens is that the soil just, there's no vitality. It doesn't, the plants struggle. And then you're wondering, well, how come my tomatoes have blight? Or how come I got this pest or disease in my garden. What's going on? Well, how come my plants are struggling? Well, that's usually why. Organic content, decaying organic matter, compost, manure, that kind of thing. If your soil is pale, very, very pale, you know that you're lacking in organic matter. What you want to have is a very dark, rich, um, very, very dark soil, like chocolate cake. Your soil should be very, very carbon, um, uh, a majority of carbon in there. If you have clay soil, your organic matter that you add there will open up the clay and allow water to infiltrate a lot better. Because you know, with clay soils, drainage becomes a problem. Adding organic matter fixes that. You don't want to put sand in clay soil, it'll just turn into cement. It doesn't actually fix the drainage. You actually need organic matter because when organic matter absorbs water, it expands and it cracks your clay and it lets water flow through. But sand just sits there as it's surrounded by clay and it doesn't add to drainage. And if you have very sandy soil, you lose a lot of your nutrients very quickly because sandy soils they outflow very very quickly. So it's important to add organic matter so that it'll hold your nutrients. Your organic matter will hold nutrients like a sponge in your sandy soil, right? So and to continue here, uh, focus on growing vegetables that are very expensive. The more expensive vegetables. Don't like if you're going to dedicate a lot of space in your garden for a crop like potatoes for instance are actually quite cheap to buy at the store. You might choose to grow specific varieties for the fun of it, um, but your garden space would be best served to grow tomatoes and peppers and broccoli and cauliflower, cabbage, and different things like that that are quite quite expensive per kilogram to produce, right? Or to buy at the store, but to produce in your yard, the costs are quite minimal. Um, and if you're just getting started, if you've never gardened before and this is your first year, start small. I would recommend you start very small and just gradually, as you gain experience with different plants, as you learn your different vegetables, you can add more and more with years as the years come by. As you gain experience, you'll get a little bit better. A lot of folks get overwhelmed. They start too big. It's easy to fall into the trap of just adding more sections and more garden rows, and then you don't know how to manage it, and the weeds get away from you, and things get overwhelming, and people give up. So sometimes it's best to start with just a small little plot, 3 or 4 different vegetables, and every year add a couple of other vegetables because they each have their own characteristics and different needs and growing patterns. So, you know, you gotta learn them each individually, kind of one by one. So start small, build up with time, and in no time at all, you'll be growing food like crazy, and food will become a tripping hazard in your property, right? And that's a good problem to have, especially with today's economy. So indoor seed starting basics. So we got here a basic seed starting mix. There are a lot of brands out there. They have a tendency to be very clever with their marketing and they'll make all kinds of promises. And this seed starting mix has all of these nutrients and added minerals and vitamins and all kind of stuff. Your seeds actually don't need to be fed very much at all in the big, especially in the beginning part. Inside the seed, the it has all the vitamins and nutrients that it needs to get started, to get to their first couple of sets of true leaves. Once the plant is grown, to a certain level that it's got its first or second or even third sets of real leaves, oh, then it starts to need vitamins. But before then, if your seed starting mix has too many vitamins in it, you'll notice that you'll have moss growing on the surface. You might have mold growing on there because it's so rich. You know, your seed is so small, it's not taking advantage of it, but every all of those other organisms might infiltrate your soil. So your basic Seed starting mix only needs to be 3 parts, 1 part pasteurized and sifted compost. You don't want big particles in your compost. You want to pasteurize it because you don't want to, it might have all kinds of different molds and fungus and different things, and your seed might be vulnerable to illness. So the way to pasteurize, if you're making your own seed starting mix and you're using your own homemade compost, I would sift it, take out the big particles because your small seeds can easily be hidden or harmed by a big piece of wood or something like that, right? And you put it in a container and you'll boil water about the same volume of water as the volume of compost that you want to pasteurize. You boil your water and you just pour it into your container with your soil and just let the heat eliminate all of these diseases and all of that stuff. Let it cool gradually, and then you can drain it off, and then you can add uh, 1 part of peat moss, the same volume as you had of compost. So 1 part of peat moss and another part of sand to help with drainage. So very, very basic. I wouldn't use beach sand because of the salt content, but we can easily get some playground sand at the hardware store. That's it's perfectly fine to use in this kind of application. So keep that in mind if you go to the garden center, and there's a bunch of different products on the shelf there, and some of them are wildly different prices and making all kinds of promises. Sometimes if it's marked on the label, seed starting mix, buy the cheapest ones. You don't need to go with the fancy premium, all of those fancy titles that they try to put on there. Save your money because you're only going to be using this product for a very short period of time. It's only a month or two that they're going to be in the pot like that. So, you don't need to spend a lot of money there. You can make your own, or you can go buy them at the store. So now, when starting seeds, I like to save as much space as possible. Like I said, I grow around 60% of all of my food. So seeds starting in the spring can get a little chaotic. I grow a large number of different vegetables. I might have 30 different vegetables on the go. So if I have a seed tray full of each one, as in no time at all, there's no room to move around my house here where I'm starting my seeds. So I like to save a lot of space. You can put one seed per pot. On the image here on the left, you see pepper plants, so a single pepper seed in each cell. And that's very organized, it's very clean, it's easy to manage, but will take up a lot of room. The image on the right is also pepper plants, but they're all planted together in a single pot, and when they get older, we'll just separate them out individually and put them in their own individual pot at that point in time. But by then, other plants will have already been transplanted and removed from my seed starting uh, area, and there's more room for them at that point. So peppers will be started later on, and we're going to be talking about the schedule for that at a little bit later. But that's perfectly fine. A lot of plants can handle being planted multiple like that. So here I have an example of a pot that I'm going to be planting today. Show you exactly this technique. I'm going to be planting my celery. Now, keep in mind, when you fill your pot, you don't want to fill it all the way up to the top here. You want to leave a gap. Usually there's like a little area on the top here on your pot. The intention for that is that you would fill your soil up to here. And this is room for when you water your pot, that the water will have space to fill up and then and infiltrate down into your soil. Um, so that's how you want to set that up. And for my celery here, I'm going to be starting with my longer maturing date plants. Like this one is a Hudson celery. And I don't know if you can see the thing, but it says it's 105 to 110 days to maturity. So that's why celery needs to be started really early in the season. It'll be quite mature when we put it out into the garden on around June 1st, end of May, beginning of June, depending on the weather. Celery doesn't handle frost very, very well, but it'll be a good sized little plant by then. And by the beginning of July, you'll start to already be able to harvest some stalks out of the outside of the plant. So basically, you don't cut the whole plant when you want to harvest celery. You just remove a couple of stalks on each plant that you've got, and you'll be in celery like that starting in July, August, September, October. And when things start to freeze, then it starts to go away. Last fall, I had celery in production well into November before they actually froze and I wasn't able to harvest anymore. Pardon me. So just carefully open the packet here. There's a little envelope on the inside. Oh, the pelleted. All right, that's cool. So basically, I'm not going to plant all of my celery seeds today because I'm going to save half of them because I have another presentation to do tomorrow. So basically, all I do is I just take my seeds and I just sprinkle them like so and try to spread them out a little bit all over the surface. You don't want your seeds to be all crowded in one little corner. And nice and spread out like so. Don't know if you can see that. So we have our seeds all spread out a little bit thinly. I have a couple of clusters, try to break them up. And then I just add a little bit of soil to cover them. Not a lot. It's a small seed. So you only need like a few millimeters of soil on top of your celery seeds. Then I like to use my one pot to kind of press everything down. And that's it. Now all it needs is to be watered. I like to water my pots. I like to water the tray rather than the top, especially when it's just the seeds. Because if you water your top, sometimes the water will slosh around a little bit and move your seeds over to the side, and then all of your seeds are trying to sprout all along the outside edge of the wall, and it's a little bit messy. So I will water a tray and just sit my pot in the watering tray. I like to use boot trays actually. They I find they're nice and sturdy. I have an example right here, and works very very well for watering plants. All right, let's move that out of the way there. So later on in the season, they'll grow, and we'll be able to divide them up and transplant straight out. So now we're looking at how to set up your lights. So a lot of folks will put their plants in the on the windowsill, but at this time of year, the day length is so short that the plants don't really have enough light to get really started. And then the plants, when they don't get enough light, they have a tendency to grow long, tall, and leggy and kind of flimsy, and they want to flop over and they kind of top heavy and weak. And so we that makes a plant that's actually quite vulnerable to all kinds of physical damage and diseases and all kinds of different things. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that the plant gets enough light, enough intensity of light. So if you set up some lights above your plants, you want to keep your lights about 3 to 4 inches above your plants. And that'll give a good intensity. And as the plants grow taller, just lift your lights up a little higher, or if your plants are sitting on a shelf or something that's adjustable, you can lower them away from the lights, depending on how your setup is arranged. And I don't recommend going out there and buying those really expensive grow lights. You know, there's systems that are $1,200, $1,500. Oh my God, no. Just go. You can get some very cheap shop lights at like 25, $30. They provide enough light. That's what I've been using for a number of years, and it's been very efficient and cost effective. So don't spend a lot of money on fancy equipment. Sometimes the plant doesn't really care. As long as you're getting enough lumens. If you have a choice, you can get lamps that are giving you full spectrum light. There's also some lights that are like blue, red, kind of give a purple kind of light. Those work great too. I find they give me a bit of a headache if I'm in a room with all those purple lights all day. So if I'm going to spend a lot of time, I prefer to use white lights. It just makes me more comfortable. It's less stressful to my eyes when I'm working in that environment. But as you can see over here, on the image here, you got your boot trays right here, and you see the water's in the boot tray, and it just infiltrates up from the bottom of the pot and kind of wicks its way up. That is very efficient and very effective for the plants because then the top surface of the soil can stay dry more often. If that stays wet too much, like if you water the top, what happens is that with the soil staying really wet like that under a lot of lights, you might also there get fungus and mosses and all kinds of things growing. Mold even might grow on the surface and make your plants ill. But if you water from the bottom, it gets wet from the bottom, and the surface will dry out faster, and you have less disease problems with your seedlings, like that. So that's something that I learned from experience that watering from below is much healthier for your plants. Also, another thing, if you can set up an oscillating fan, just a cheap little fan that just moves back and forth like that. It doesn't have to be really strong wind, but a little breeze over top of your little seedlings like that will help them. The action of swaying like that will stress the stems a little bit, and they'll grow tougher fibers, and it'll give you much shorter, much stockier, much stronger stems, and the plants will be more resilient when we bring them outside. You prepare them a little bit for some of the conditions that they're going to get when they get outdoors, right? And when it's time to start feeding, like at this point here, these plants are at a stage where they need to be fed. But they don't need very strong fertilizers. So typically, I would suggest to water it down a bit, half strength. Whatever suggested on the container for your fertilizer, whether you're using Miracle Grow or compost tea or fish emulsion, if you can handle the smell, or seaweed emulsion. There's different ways that you can feed your plants. Um, Water them down at half strength, and your plants will thrive. It'll be very good. Later on, when they're fully mature, then you can go full strength. But when they're very small like this, you have to cut it down just a little bit. And here you can see in the image, the this pot right over here. This is celery. It's a Hudson celery. Is the very type of celery that I just planted today. I like Hudson celery. It produces well in our climate, and it's a good, reliable celery. Um, but you have to get it started in February so that it's ready to be put out in early June and produce the rest of the summer. So timing for these seeds is critically important. So that brings us to our next slide here. So which seeds to start indoors and when? So February is a good time to start onions, celery, and sweet potato slips. So these are plants that take a long time to mature, and they have a very slow um, uh, immature stage. So it takes a long time for them to get going, right? So that's February. In March, you start your peppers of all kinds, hot peppers, green peppers, yellow peppers, orange peppers. You know, all your crazy hot ghost peppers. You start them in March. And in April, we switch to tomatoes, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, all of the cabbage family, and your tomatoes start in April. In May, you might start some cucumber seeds, pumpkin squash, but if you start them indoors, start them only 2 weeks before you plan on bringing them outside. If cucumbers and related plants, all of the squash and this and the pumpkins and all of that, they're all the same families, cucumbers. They have very fine, tiny little roots. They're easily broken. And when you transplant them, they often go into transplant shock and they struggle. They very much suffer. So the issue there is, you know, you don't want them to get too old, too big. Your cucumber plants and your squash and stuff, it'll when it sprouts, it'll have two first leaves that come out of the seeds. So it's just basically it's part of the seeds. It's not its true leaves. When the first true leaf comes out in the middle, that's the point it has to be transplanted outside. If you wait later than that, it'll suffer and you won't get your head start will go away right there. Usually, I would just simply recommend don't even start them indoors. Just plant them straight outside. After June 10th, it's safe to put your all these very tender plants that can't handle the frost at all. Plant your cucumbers and stuff straight outside. I like to start a few indoors, not the whole gamut, in case I have some issues. I have livestock, so sometimes they get into the garden and slugs or something, and sometimes you lose a few. So if you have a couple of backups that are already started in pots, um, it's a good idea to then you can take those and kind of fill the holes that got damaged. Cucumber beetles can be an issue, especially with a plant that's struggling. Usually, when you see a plant that's getting hit by pests, you know that that plant attracted those pests because it was ill, it was suffering. The plants that are struggling are the ones that are going to be attacked by pests first. That's an indicator to tell you that there's something going wrong. So when to transplant these things outside? Here in the picture, we have a colt's foot. So colt's foot, it's a flower that the flower sprouts out of the ground before the leaves do. They call it the son before the father. Um, so basically, that's an indicator that it's safe to plant cold hardy crops like onions, lettuce, spinach, and things like that. It's safe to plant them outside as soon as you see your first colt's foot coming out. It kind of looks like a dandelion, but if you look closely, it's a very different flower. And when the leaves do come out, here in the picture, there's a few dandelion leaves right there, but they're not actually part of the same plant. They're just growing beside one another. Colt's foot gives you a round leaf like that with kind of like a scalloped edge, right? So that's your indicator that it's time to take your onions that you started in February, then you can put them outside. So this picture was taken on April 13th last year. So, you know, that lets you know April, you know, end of March and April, it's a good time. You want to watch the weather, and when the temperatures are right, the colt's foot are going to sprout. It's time to transplant your onions outside, and you can plant your first seeds of lettuce, spinach, and peas. Those are cold hardy plants that you start outside. They prefer the cool weather. They don't like the heat very much at all. So you can get those started very early. A lot of folks will wait till June and to start everything, and things just don't mature right. That's wise. The timing's got to be correct. So the last frost date here, and all of these dates that I'm telling you here are specific to our region here in Kent County, New Brunswick, right? So roughly May 11th to the 20th, The last frost date will be in there somewhere. The weather will tell you more. It's not the calendar. Sometimes you'll have frosts into June. It happens. But on average, between May 11th and the 20th is your last frost date. If you plant early around that time, I would recommend if you have frost blankets, put some frost blankets on top. If you don't have frost blankets, you can just put a regular sheet over top, like a curtain or a sheet or any kind of fabric, just over top of your plants that are just getting started. If you have if there's calling for a frost that night, so just always keep your eye on the weather. And but I would recommend sometimes if it's cold, it'll stunt a lot of your seedlings. So sometimes it's worth waiting, especially with cucumbers. It's worth waiting until June 10th, mid June. And it's those plants that you plant later in warmer weather will often outpace the ones that you planted early, try to get a head start on your season. They'll get stunted, and the seeds that got planted later will often overtake them in their development because they didn't have that stress from the cold nights, right? So which seeds to start outdoors and when? Well, March to April, you got your peas, spinach, lettuce, onion sets, or your onion starts. But slugs can be a major problem in early spring, especially with plants that are starting to just sprout out of the ground. They're very tender, and to a slug, that just rings a dinner bell. And they can come in and wipe out your whole crop of plants that are just getting started, right? So it's a good idea to take some precautions. Slug traps. I like to use slug bait. It's a product. It's not very expensive. It's considered organic. It's basically it's like a bread product with some iron in it. So there's no poison involved. It's just that the slugs are allergic to iron, and when the bready parts taste good to them, and they eat it, and the iron destroys their digestive system, and they go away. So for 2 weeks at the beginning of the season, I'll spread some slug pellets like that over top of all of the garden beds that have young seedlings. You know, when the beans start to sprout, your lettuce, fava beans, yeah, corn, all of that stuff. The slugs will eat your pellets before they eat your little plants, and you'll have much less damage then. Later on in the season, I switch over to using beer traps, which is basically just a container with some beer in the bottom, stale beer, or you can cheat and you can just take some water, sugar, and some yeast and a little bit of flour and just mix it all together. It smells like beer to the slug, and it's not smart enough to know the difference. And you can save some money. Don't waste money feeding beer to your slugs if when you have some spare a little bit of flour and sugar, and some yeast in the fridge. You can substitute. Um, so you plant everything else starting the end of May. So all your corn, your squash, your beans, carrot, parsnips, bok choy, the whole gamut. Everything else except for the ones that we named already. Your onions, your broccoli, and your cabbage, and your all of these other things, celery and onions. You start those indoors, but everything else you can go out in the garden then. Garlic is planted in October, so it has to spend the winter. We wait till late in the season to plant your garlic because if you plant it too early, it starts to sprout. The frost comes and it destroys the part that just come out of the ground, and then it has to start over. So it uses up its resources and then it loses those. So we want to wait till late in the season, right before the ground freezes. That's when you want to put your garlic in the ground. It'll spend the winter in the cold. The cold will make the bulb split, and it'll create all your different all your little cloves. And in springtime, it'll sprout, and then garlic is ready to harvest in August. So be sure if you're going to plant garlic, that's a section of your garden that you cannot till. You have to leave it alone, and you have to. So it's really important to mark it, indicate it. This is where my garlic is. Don't till and don't disturb the ground and don't plant something else here because you won't see it until later on in the spring, right? So it's easy to get confused. Indicating what you got where is really, really critically important. Which reminds me, um, I just planted some celery over there and I didn't indicate the pot. So, a little piece of tape. Uh, so it was Hudson celery. Double check. Yeah, it was Hudson celery. So write it down. Voila. So it's really important to indicate what you put in your pot because you might not remember later on. You might think you'll remember, but you won't. If you're anything like me, you'll forget what's in which pot and things go chaotic on you real quick. So basically, like I'm sharing these things with you because I've made every mistake in the book. I learned everything I know the hard way. So you know, it's bunks on the head. That's how I learned. Uh, so that's that's how I share my knowledge. Uh, so spring garden preparation. Now there are two ways of gardening. There's a traditional way, which is basically it's a row garden. So you have a row of one type of vegetable, you have a walkway, then you have another row of vegetables, then you have a walkway and another row of vegetables. That is a strategy that's made for the use of tractors on the broad acre, right? So the spacing is set up all regular and even so that a tractor could go up and down, running machines, the tines. You can use a machine to come in and scrape after and break up the weeds. You can use your machine to lay out all of your rows for your different vegetables. You can, broad acre. But your basic backyard garden doesn't have those constraints. You don't have a tractor to come in and make your rows for you. You have an option in your backyard garden to really, really streamline the work involved and to actually increase significantly a three-time increase in productivity, right? So, your traditional way of gardening, first of spring, as soon as the ground is dry enough that you can till, you can run a tractor, you can run a tiller. Um, you run your tiller once, you wait a week. The plants are going to decompose. Everything that's buried underground is going to decompose and die off. There's going to be a few strands of weeds sticking out of the ground. So a week later, you have to come in and till a second time to destroy the rest of those weeds. Then you can wait a week again. Then you have to spread your amendments on there. It's either your manure, your compost, fertilizer pellets, whatever it is that you use. You spread it around there, lime, you name it. And then you have to till a third time. So that's, we're into 3 weeks already to get to that point. So when you mix in your manures and all of that stuff, you wait another week. So this is about a month. So you have to get ready a month ahead of time before you can actually get into your garden and start gardening. After all of that tilling, you have to make your garden rows. So you go in with a hoe, or if you have a piece of equipment, a four-wheeler with a like you need equipment for this kind of thing, right? You're either making your rows with a hoe, or you have a machine that does it for you, or you can hire a neighbor who has that equipment to come by and do that for you. Some people have um, not excavators, but I can't remember the word right now. But basically, it's just a machine to make your garden rows. You can attach that to a four-wheeler or a tractor or some different things like that. So you make your garden rows and then you install your trellises and all of your supports. I strongly recommend that you build your structures to help your plants climb before you plant your plants, because once your seedlings are in there, it's a little fiddly to start putting stakes in the ground around their roots, and you can do more damage than good. So build your tomato trellises first, and then plant your tomatoes at the right spot beneath them. So you plant your seeds and your seedlings, and you're good to go, and your gardening season is started. But there's a lot of steps there, and there's a lot of labor. If you go with a no-till method, that's basically in the fall after you're done your gardening, you just throw some compost onto your garden bed, you put a tarp on top, done. So basically, in the spring, you just pull the tarp off of your garden bed. You can, if you didn't put compost in the fall, you can put it in the spring, and you can immediately plant that same day, right? So while everybody else is tilling their garden, and they're a month away from planting, you're already planting your tomato, your lettuce, and your spinach and your onions, and all of these different things are already in the ground, and your neighbors haven't started to seed yet in their garden. So you know that it's a huge head start. It's difficult to get onions in the ground early enough if you have to wait till the ground is dry enough to run a tiller, right? So no tilling gives you a longer period of time that you have access to your garden. Much less labor. You don't have to make your rows. Your garden beds are already pre-made, right? So, you spread some compost, you install your trellises, and you plant your seeds and seedlings. So all of this can all be done on a garden bed, before lunch on your first day, right? So that's 1/8 the labor that you would have in your traditional garden, like Grandpa used to have. And you keep things weeded between plants until they form a full canopy. When the plants have completely covered the garden bed, there's no more sun reaching the ground, and there's no more weeding because there's not enough light hitting the ground to make weeds grow between your plants. So basically, what I'm talking about here is like, instead of a single row and a walkway, you take 3 or 4 rows and you group them together, and you get rid of the walkways in between, because the walkways are just a space that's going to breed weeds. It's a big blank space, and you're trying to keep it denuded of plants. Well, weeds want to grow in bare soil. So, you eliminate those walkways between your plant rows and put them together. And then what happens is that the plants are growing so close together that there's no room for weeds. To me, if a weed is growing someplace in your garden, you could have put an onion there, or you could have put a lettuce plant or a bean plant there. That the weeds are telling you where you missed some spots, right? And when the rainy season, the spring rains are pretty well done, and we're getting into summer heat, then you can mulch your walkways. What walkways that you do have, mulch them up, throw some seaweed, some hay, thick hay. You don't go with a thin layer of hay, because you're just going to be planting hay. But if you go with a layer of 6 to 10 inches of hay, that eliminates all weeds from growing there, and creates an environment where you don't evaporate your water. So the water is very much more stable for your plants. They don't struggle in the heat of summer, and they have a tendency to just thrive and grow consistently and constantly through the summer months. And basically, so your weeding and your watering is much reduced by using that kind of system. And I'll be describing that in future webinars. I'm going to be showing you exactly how to manage this kind of system. Right now, we're just going to be talking a little bit in general on what the protocols are for running on for using it.